When you're making a big journey in the wilderness, particularly in a boat like this, you have to go light with limited supplies and resources. Because of that, self-reliance and the skills of bushcraft go hand in hand with canoeing. This is the Mississippi River in Canada. Today it's a majestic wilderness river in one of my favourite of all environments. But 300 years ago, it was an arterial trade route that helped fuel the fur trade and put the country of Canada on the world map. Canada is a land of water. For centuries, the canoe was the only way to get around, and for me it's still the best way to see the wilderness. With a canoe, more than anything, it's the journey, not the destination, that matters. I just think it's fantastic to come out into a place as wild as this. There's so much interesting wildlife to be had here, but there are also the occasional opportunity to surprise the cameraman, who in this occasion has to face towards me, and you can't see that behind him, I just turned the boat around, there's a moose. Fantastic. I've always wanted to paddle the great fur trade rivers. In such unspoilt surroundings, it's easy to picture the Mississippi as it was then. From the dense forested banks to the lodges of the beaver, whose pelts drove the trade. 300 years ago, huge canoes would have ploughed up and down this river, taking goods to the far-flung trappers in the north and returning with the valuable furs before the winter freeze. Stories of the men who paddled those canoes have always fascinated me, and none more so than those of the voyageurs, the hardiest of them all. The banks of this river would have rung to the sound of their songs, sung to the rhythm of their paddles, to take their minds off the distances still to go. In the spirit of the voyageurs, I was paddling an old-style traditional canoe, a cedar and canvas prospector. The natural materials seemed to suit this place. Everything felt right, from the grain of the cedar down to the sound of the water lapping against the bow. But a boat like this must be treated carefully. In serious white water, this is like paddling an eggshell in comparison to a modern plastic boat. On a good day's paddling, I expect to cover many miles. But the fur traders would always start their journeys with a short day. They would make camp only a few miles into their journey. That way they would have the opportunity to use most of the kit they'd be taking with them. If anything was missing, it wouldn't be too far to go back and get it. It was known as the Hudson's Bay Start. It's a practice I employ too, but before I looked for a campsite, I had a small rapid to negotiate. The river's picking up speed here. I love that. It's the rapids that provide the excitement on a journey like this, but this wasn't whitewater rafting. These canoes are open, and you need to treat even minor rapids with respect. Fantastic. There's no stopping halfway down, whatever happens. That's why it's essential to carry a spare paddle. With the rapids safely negotiated, it was time to look for a campsite. I made sure I was off the river long before dark. That way I had plenty of time and daylight to iron out any snags. I'd brought traditional canvas kit bags and a large traditional tent, a baker tent. The more you immerse yourself in your surroundings, the more you get out of a journey like this. This may not look like the simplest tent to erect, but it was more in keeping with the spirit of my journey. This is where the tent really scores. It doubles as your tarp. Fantastic piece of kit, giving you not only a sleeping space, but a living space if the weather's bad. The voyageurs wouldn't have had such luxuries. Space and weight were at a premium, reserved solely for cargo, so they would often improvise a shelter each night by propping their huge canoes on the side, then lighting a fire to keep warm and drive the insects away. Firelighting's always important in the wilderness, but perhaps nowhere more so than when you're canoeing. The water here is cold. You can capsize, your equipment can be swept away. You could find yourself here stranded on the verge of hypothermia. It's very important that on your person, on your body, you carry the means to make fire. And in this environment, that means a knife and a device for creating sparks, because that's the most reliable when it's wet. Doesn't matter if I soak this, it will still give me fire. And here, this part of the river, there's plenty of birch. We can use the birch bark to start our fire. We just shave up some fine shavings from the bark. The underlayers will be dry. And we strike a spark down into there, which catches fire. Plenty of birch bark to get the fire going. And then small sticks. While the fire is lighting up, your knife goes back where it belongs and your fire lighting equipment goes back securely fastened to your person so that you don't put it down and lose it. Looking at the paintings of voyageurs travelling through this land, one thing is very distinctive, and that is that they use a tripod to suspend their cooking pot. And they may have carried with them a chain, or they might have done what I'm going to show you now. Put your knife away. It's always important to put your knife away, I tell you, especially when there are mosquitoes or biting flies around, because they're very distracting. It's very easy to cut yourself. I've already got a scar. I made that mistake many years ago. What I'm going to do now is I need to make the top part of this stick flexible. I'm not going to make it all flexible, but I'll explain why in a minute. First thing is to twist the fibers so they pop like that. They're just loosening there. And I'm going to use these little side branches to help me loosen that as I work my way up the stick towards the growing tip. Once I get up here, I'm going to make like a crank and work back, softening the fibres as I go, like this, and making it into what's called a withy. These are incredibly useful, and they grow back, so I'm not destroying a tree, I'm just removing a small part. And I'm going to take that down to within about a hand's breadth of this fork, so that I end up with a hook on the end of this stick. These are the sticks that are going to form the tripod. And using the top of these withy that I've softened, I'm going to form a clove hitch. What I like to do then is just take that up through one of the crutches of the sticks and down. Just makes it a little bit more secure, stops it slipping. And there's our tripod ready to hold the pot over the fire. If we want to adjust the height, we adjust the spread of the legs. It's easy to romanticize the life of the voyageurs, the outdoor life, singing songs as they paddled, the camaraderie and the massive celebrations when they returned to port. But they would rise before daybreak and paddle for 18 hours a day, resting each hour just long enough to smoke a pipe. The pace was relentless. They were expected to paddle at 45 paddle strokes a minute.
Je raconterai, toi jolie demoiselle, j'ai point choisi, j'ai pris la plus belle. C'est l'Aveyron qui nous mène et qui nous mène, mais c'est l'Aveyron qui nous mène en haut. Beautiful, beautiful day. I think the canoe is the most magical way to see the wilds, to get close to wildlife. You really are communing with nature when you travel in a canoe. I really enjoy it. I think that it's also a great panacea for the world we live in today. You know, when you paddle a canoe, you have to learn to move at the pace of the water, and almost as soon as you accept that fact, life becomes so much easier and simpler.
Once you're on a river like this, you could really sense the forest spreading out for miles around. The river is the artery that links it all together, one immense natural entity.
Looks like I'm dressed to deal with some sort of chemical outbreak, doesn't it? But actually, I'm just about to walk into what's called muskeg, which is like swamp. And that is a very good place to find dry firewood. But of course, that's the breeding ground for these billions of insects that populate this area during the summer months.
Black flies and mosquitoes plague every warm-blooded creature around here. In the 1950s, the Canadian government carried out tests and discovered that an exposed forearm could be bitten 280 times in just 1 minute. So my bug jacket may make things hot and sweaty, but it's an essential item of clothing.
It's said firewood makes you warm 3 times. First, collecting it. Secondly, shifting it. And third, when you burn it.
I'm going to make a bannock, which is an unleavened bread, which is very much the fare of canoe trips. And there are many ways of going about these. I have a very simple recipe, which is 2 parts of flour to 1 part milk powder. But I'm going to add in another ingredient today because I'm making a cake-like bannock. I'm going to add some powdered egg. Unleavened breads like this, breads that don't involve yeast, are very much the fare of the Canadian backwoods. The voyageurs used to make something similar they called galette, and there are descriptions of that containing everything from the dirt from the cook's hands to dead flies. If I was to make one of those today, I'm sure there'd be a few dead mosquitoes in there. But the key ingredient to all of these really is baking powder, and here in Canada they have this wonderful ingredient, the magic baking powder. And that's all the basic ingredients. Oh, there is a dead mosquito in there too. I think it's only fair enough I get a chance to bite them back. I'm going to also now add a touch of sugar. I'm using brown sugar because I think it gives much better flavour for this sort of outdoor cooking. And when you're on the trail, flavours become very important to you. Some raisins. At the end of the day's travel, you know, drying yourself off, getting the fire going, getting a brew on or a meal cooked is actually rather nice routine of the day, something you look forward to, and it's one of the nicer aspects of this sort of travel, really. You don't need this sort of bread because if you do, you punch the gas out of it, so it's quite different to making a yeasted bread. So what I want to do is just round that. Hands hot. Oil's good and hot. Push it down to spread it within this pan. Now, what happens now is that this gets tilted towards the fire and a proper stick behind it. We don't use cooking times, not cooking like this outdoors, because the temperature, the way the wind is blowing, the amount of moisture in the air, that all affects things. So things are cooked when they're done. And I've got one last ingredient, and this is a real treat, rum. Just a little tot of rum just on top of there, drizzled, as they say, on top. If you could only smell this. There it is, bannock. It's unlucky to cut bannock, so you always break bannock. There, look at that. Oh. It always takes a couple of days to settle into the journey. Muscles need to acclimatise to the demands of paddling, and the body and mind must adapt to the river. Once you've tuned in, you can paddle for weeks. Although I'm perfectly happy with my own company, it's always good to share an experience like this. For the next few days, I'll be joined by an expert canoeist and good friend, Ray Goodwin. Ray has paddled his way along many of the great rivers of the world, and with his experience on the water, it'd be good to have him along. Besides, he'd be able to appreciate my singing.
Jolie Rochelle, je rencontrais trois jolies demoiselles qui nous mènent, c'est l'Aveyron qui nous mène en haut.
If you time the comment to the song perfectly, you're going to just distract me. You're doing it too soon. I've seen these rocks.
Je rencontrais trois jolies demoiselles. Je rencontrais trois jolies demoiselles. It's a nice pace of life.
Yeah.
You really do start to feel a part of the landscape. You feel the influences, don't you? The wind.
You do.
And
I mean, a lot of the time I like to travel light and very, very fast. But there comes a time, and I'm really going to have to make the room to actually do trips like this, where being in the place is as important as the actual destination you're heading for.
Absolutely. C'est l'Aveyron qui mène, qui nous mène, c'est l'Aveyron. Something like that, I can't remember.
I'm not going to understand, you just keep going.
Mon revenons de la jolie Rochelle.
Very nice.
Nice if that rock wasn't there,
Yeah.
because we could go right and come left. But that's in exactly the wrong place, isn't it?
But we need to have a look.
The only clear way to assess a rapid is to leave the canoes and take a look from the shore. Ray and I could then decide on the best route through and check for any hidden dangers.
That way, there's my marker.
But this,
When you're hundreds of miles from civilization, the last thing you need is a broken canoe. Where Ray's boat may bounce over the rocks, one mistake here, and this rapid can turn mine to matchwood.
This rock that's underwater, the wave clip left end of it in that flatter water and then run the diagonal through the deep.
okay.
Bits of rock beyond, but they're shallow, they're not a problem.
At least it's on the right as well.
Yeah.
There seems more water here.
Yeah,
Okay. Sorry?
done.
Let's do it.
It was great to see Ray in his element. His focus on the canoe was total.
That was nice.
Lovely. Fantastic. Whitewater's always exhilarating. It makes a nice change from the sections where you paddle slowly and you're doing all the motoring of the boat. It's nice the way the river just picks you up and you feel the current taking, and all of a sudden you're having to think 3 or 4 steps ahead. Wakes you up. It's great. Brilliant. I clipped a couple of rocks in there. A little bit of damage to the paddle. Have to repair that later. That was fun.
That was good.
Voyageurs would have run as many of these rapids as possible. Time was of the essence, and it's far quicker and easier than carrying everything round. Even without cargo, there's enough to carry, which is why, when canoeing, you must still travel light.
Ah, no song.
I think it's your turn to sing.
No.
Go on,
no,
give us a
no,
song.
no. Most of those that know me wouldn't even dream of hearing me sing.
Probably just as well.
Very much so. The thing about this section that I like is we keep getting little rapids and little riffles to push us along. Too much of the flat stuff and you have to start working.
I don't mind though, because while I enjoy the white water stuff, that's not what the canoe means to me. I think of the canoe as a vehicle, as a means to get me here, to see the other things, really. These riverbanks here, we have all these plants.
Yeah.
This is a habitat that's virtually missing in Britain. You know, we've so tidied up our rivers, we've forgotten what wild rivers are like. When I come to somewhere like this, it always makes me think of what we've lost.
The next day we lost the film crew. The amount of equipment they bring requires a small flotilla of canoes, and they were starting to hinder our progress. There they go. From here on, we'd just use a small camera, and we'd need to be a lot more self-reliant. Once I get smoke, try to maintain a nice even pressure. Lovely smell from this. Lighting a fire is one of the most crucial survival skills. Equipped with just a knife and a piece of cord, perhaps just a shoelace, it's possible to do this in just a few minutes. But the technique has to be learnt. And as with most things, practice, and in my case a lot of practice, has made perfect. Now the notch is full of dust, which is glowing. See it smoking there of its own accord. Oops, I dropped it. Right. Pick that up. And add him to the tinder that we've prepared, like so. Pinch that in there. And away we go. Okay, and of course that then we can take to our birch bark, and there's our fire. Fred asked me to show him how to do this, and it's not as easy as it can look.
Oops. Frustration.
Bushcraft is all about taking your time, keeping on trying, and not losing your temper. Ray was doing very well at all three. He may have been hot and bothered, but he stuck to his task.
Okay, here we go again.
When I teach this technique on courses, I can easily tell who will succeed and who will not, because more than half of it is in the mind. Left foot needs to be closer to the drill, not quite that close.
No, I'm just trying to get everything balanced.
Good,
and
yeah. Everybody feels this the first time they do it. Push down with your left hand. Excellent, keep going. Oh, you're doing great.
each time gets closer.
For more than an hour, he persevered.
I thought it was going there.
That's the best yet. And I'm not going to say anything this time, but when you get that going like that, just maintain it. Yeah, you've got an ember.
Yeah.
Nice and gentle. Let me help you. gently roll the board away. Okay, that's it. Relax now, Ray. Just relax. Catch your breath. Are you ready?
I'm ready. Now.
Pack it tight. Be hard on it. Not so close to your face. That's good. A bit harder. Away from your face or you'll drip on it. Little puff.
I got flames. I got flames. Houston, we have fire. Absolutely fantastic. Mr. Mears.
Well done.
Oh, hold on. Oh.
One of the things that I like about bushcraft is that hidden in amongst all of these skills is something else, and that is this business of never giving in.
Yeah.
And I think that's what these things teach. Then it's not just about lighting a fire on the ground, it's about lighting a fire within. Now that we were no longer hampered by a crew, we were much less conspicuous and were rewarded almost immediately with the chance to get close to a magnificent moose. By using a particular paddle stroke called the Indian stroke, we can move absolutely silently. Years ago, that paddle stroke was used by local inhabitants to hunt animals. Today, we use it to get close to them and see them. A canoe is the most natural way to travel. So silent, so serene. No wonder animals accept your presence so readily. Memories like this stay with you forever.
I wish I could actually see it. Incredible. Anything that flies and doesn't sting, it's got to be a friend.
Journeys like this provide the chance to observe and to learn. There was evidence everywhere of one of the most famous inhabitants of Canada, the beaver. These animals can be quite elusive, but the best time to see them is after the sun has set. With our camp established, I went a little way upriver to see if I could see some. beaver are amazing animals. It's hard to imagine, but there was a time when there were so few beavers on these rivers because of the trapping that the Hudson's Bay Company actually had to employ engineers to build canals and dams to keep their canoes running, because the beavers had been removed who maintained the waterways. The demise of the beaver continued up to the 1930s. It was then that a half-breed Indian known as grey owl set about bringing the plight of this animal to the attention of the world. Grey owl lived out in the wilds, where he was inseparable from the beaver. He was a prolific writer who captured the essence of life in the wilderness and the plants and animals that live there. His books sparked imaginations all over the world. One of the most popular, Tales of an Empty Cabin, was typed up by a family friend called Margaret Charcot.
He read stories to us and say, "How does that sound?" And with him reading the story to you, it didn't sound the same when you read it yourself. It wouldn't have the expression in it, the prose through it, that you would pick up when he would read it to you. He wrote all night and slept in the daytime, when the beavers did. He was on their timetable.
He was so in tune with the beaver that he even shared the log cabin he lived in with them.
It was very rough, and the floor, of course, was quite muddy because the beavers were in and out all the time. And the table, part of it was chewed a bit.
His books brought him lecture tours throughout Britain, where people really bought into the romanticism of this straight-faced, enigmatic Indian and his love for the wild, an image he did nothing to dispel.
If it was a photographer or some picture he thought would be made public, then he'd get that set face, stern. But he wasn't like that with us at all, because I had lots of pictures of him with a good smile.
But he was keen to play up the Indian stereotype. When he met King George V, it was Grey Owl who dictated the protocol, not the king.
He said that the king had to be seated, the royal family had to be seated before he entered. And then he had his grand entry, and no, you can't do that. He said, well, that's what I'm doing, and he did. And then when it was over, he slapped the king on the back and said, I'll be seeing you. But he got away with it.
In fact, he was getting away with far worse. On his death in 1938, it was discovered that Grey Owl had been living a lie. He wasn't an Indian at all, but Archie Bellany from Hastings. You can imagine the uproar. But to me, what matters is how he lived his life and what he did for the wilds. He had a profound impact. Years ahead of his time, he preached the word of conservation, and it fell on a receptive audience. And although he wasn't the Native American, Native Canadian he claimed to be, Canada has never abandoned him. And I think that that's all credit to them. He was a remarkable man. And through his efforts, not only was the beaver conserved, but very much the environment that the beaver themselves maintained. The next day we decided to stay put. It's good to take the opportunity to clean your kit and catch up with admin, running repairs and the like.
Oh, that is better. Oh.
And it was a perfect opportunity to involve Ray in a bit more bushcraft. Ray, you've seen me use this saw to collect firewood, but this morning it's going to take on a different meaning as a thing to take with you on a canoe trip. Obviously a folding saw is convenient because it's safe and easy to transport in the canoe. If you look at the stories of the great explorers who opened up Canada, one of the things that you come across frequently are stories firstly of people being turned over in the rapids and losing their equipment, and the other of course is people breaking paddles frequently. I think one of the key skills if you're making a canoe journey is being able to replace a paddle if it gets lost or broken. So the first task is to find the right wood. What I really want is a piece of wood long enough to make a paddle with a straight grain, absolute straight grain, and ideally, rather than go into the forest and look for a tree to take down, what we'll look for is a piece of dead wood hung up somewhere on the side of the river, because there's plenty of wood around like that. And really the secret here is being able to spot the resource that you need for yourself.
That's the one that's caught my attention. That looks nice and straight, and there are not too many knots. I'm very conscious of not breaking the blade. Explaining that to Ray wouldn't be so much fun.
A forest like this is full of useful resources, particularly for food and for medicine. Key is learning to spot them. This lichen, for example, here in Canada, they often call this old man's beard. And this contains an acid which can be used as an antifungicidal. You can boil this up and use that to treat athlete's foot. It can be a handy thing when you've been in canoe boots for a month. How'd you get on, Ray?
Very good question. Have I got a paddle or have I got firewood?
Well, I'll give you one answer. You got the right wood.
Well, I couldn't get the smell. It was the look of the thing, so I'm pleased with that.
Now, I imagined that when you looked at it, you saw this fault line. I thought
Yes.
that would be good to split on. But if we split there, we end up with this curve in the wood.
Okay.
What we want is this nice straight section here, this side. And I think if we split through there, we will get that. There she goes. Charcoal from the fire made a useful pencil. And we'll just mark now the outline from this existing paddle. Of course, if you didn't have one, you'd have to guess, wouldn't you? So what we've got now is a line that we can cut down to and actually start to shape the handle there, maybe. If I'd cut too deep, we wouldn't have had a paddle at all. And I wanted to make the shaft thicker anyway, as the wood was cedar, which is easy to carve, but not as strong as the wood of the paddle that we used for measuring. I can't stress enough how much easier tasks like this are with the right equipment, well maintained. I'm quite bold in the way I use the axe, and I think that this is a key to good axe work, is a sharp axe used with boldness. This is how, this is how paddles were made once, in the old days. My own feeling, you may disagree with me, but I think if someone's going to paddle a canoe on a wilderness trip, they should know how to do this.
I don't, because I think it's definitely a skill I would like, but at the end of the day, I carry a spare paddle. Everybody I paddle with carries a spare paddle, but I just love watching that paddle come into existence.
Well, Ray, I think that is about done. I've left it a bit heavy in places because it's cedar,
Right.
and it doesn't have the strength of the harder woods. You'll feel it's even a little bit flexible even now.
Yeah.
It's a much more delicate wood, but it is very light, and I know you like a light paddle.
Very much so.
Want to give it a try?
Yeah.
Take it for a spin, go on. What do you reckon then? What are your first impressions, Ray?
It gets the seal of approval.
There you go, Ray Goodwin, maestro of the paddle.
I like it. This was a log this morning.
After his success with firelighting, Ray wanted to give it a go too.
Well, I slept very well, but Ray was up all night trying to carve a paddle, and he ended up with this. Well, it got smaller and smaller. So he's promised that this is a spatula, really, and he's going to use it to make some pancakes this morning. We'll see.
That is got to be the most labour-intensive spatula ever in the history of Bushcraft. Oh dear, oh dear.
It's a lovely morning, and we've been paddling hard for a few days. It's nice to take some time, relax a little bit. But of course, the voyageurs who came up these rivers, who have a real romance surrounding them, for them life was really hard. They'd have woken up at the crack of dawn, somebody would have shouted, "Staleve, staleve," time to get up. And up they'd get, and they'd get underway before they even had breakfast. It'd be several miles down the river, and then they'd have breakfast, probably cooked the night before. That was the beginning of an 18-hour day paddling. Really hard life. And you have to remember, they weren't just going downriver, they were going up them as well. Quite amazing. Anyway, this morning it's pancakes. Very traditional canoeing fare. Gives you some bulk in your stomach to get the paddles moving in the morning, and really looking forward to it. Hey!
Oh dear, that's the most anemic pancake I think I've ever cooked. You ready for this, Ray?
Yeah. A bit of butter. Now, the test. It's nice and hot. Very good. Very nice.
With the pancakes inside us and rested from our day in camp, we were both eager to get back on the water. Every stretch of this river has its own character, and the next stage was no exception. We were faced with a sequence of rapids of varying size and force. When you're on a journey like this, there are 3 different ways to deal with rapids. The ones that are most fun are the ones you can run, and in some ways, the bigger the better. This is what Ray loves, the challenge of whitewater. I love it too. As we came down, it was fairly straightforward all the way through, and then at the end there were these 3 massive waves waiting to eat you, and one feeds you a little bit right into the next one, which turns you a little bit right into the next one. In a rapid like this, nature tests both your nerve and your skill. Ray couldn't resist showing off on camera by surfing the wave. This takes expert balance and control. I told you, he's a paddle maestro and a little bit crazy. Some rapids just run out of water. I could feel the bottom of my delicate canoe scraping along the rocks. It was time to get out. This sort of rapid requires a process called lining. Basically walking your canoe through the shallows on a line. It can be a bit awkward at times, but it's no real hardship. Ray could still paddle down in his modern canoe. Plastic bounces off the rocks a lot better than cedar and canvas. But walking's a small price to pay for paddling such a beautiful canoe. It's not very Hollywood, is it? It was Hollywood making this movie. They'd have this boat going through the most outrageous rapids head on into them. We'll come down here, but then we'll probably have 20 of these boats and we break them. The reality on a wilderness journey is this is all there is. And what you have to do is you always have to put the boat first, because that's your means of getting home. You can have too little water, or of course, you can have too much. This is Split Rock Rapid. There's no way a canoe will go down that. And of course that was one of the second design criteria of the boats. First, they had to be capable of carrying the loads and negotiating the rocks. But secondly, they had to be light enough that you could carry them past the obstacles they couldn't navigate. Tying the paddles to the thwarts in this way creates a really useful set of handles when carrying the canoe. This is what's known as a portage, and yes, it's hard work. The voyageurs would have had to manhandle their huge canoes all along here. Some of the portage trails on these rivers are very long indeed. They must have been tough. Then once the canoe was in the water, they'd have to return for their load. In addition to their own clothing, each man was expected to carry 6 90-pound packs, 2 packs at a go. It was time for us to set up our last camp, and the end of the portage trail was as good a spot as any. Each journey finds its own rhythm, and this was no exception. I agreed to catch supper if Ray set the fire. A whitefish, fantastic. They're great eating. What a way to round off a wonderful trip. We'd both be taking home great memories. Negotiating just part of this voyageur route had been a fabulous experience. After dinner, it was good to have time to reflect. It's a bit spooky to be camped alongside a portage trail like this. These trails were established even before the fur trade by the local Indian population moving through the forest, and then of course they became the highways for the
voyageurs to portage their pieces, 90-pound packs, past the falls. I sometimes think that if you sat here quietly enough in the evening, you could see the ghosts of the voyageurs pass by.
Envoyons de l'avant nos gens, envoyons de l'avant, envoyons de l'avant nos gens, envoyons de l'avant, envoyons de l'avant nos gens, envoyons de l'avant.
The last day on the river always brings mixed feelings. I was a little sad to have to leave such a wonderful place, but it was coupled with a true sense of satisfaction that we'd really been to the heart of this river.
But more than that, when you use this sort of equipment, canvas, wood, you've accepted that your life in the wilderness, the two are one. That when it rains, you'll be a little bit damp, but when it stops, you'll be dry. Sometimes I think when we use modern equipment, we try to exclude nature too much. It's almost like we're at war with it. For me, that spoils the spell. It breaks the spell of being here.
Making this journey reinforced my understanding of what the canoe means to the people of Canada. For the original Indians, through the fur traders, right up to today, people have an affinity with it. It becomes part of them, a feeling summed up by former Canadian Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau,
who said that what sets a canoeing expedition apart is that it purifies you more rapidly and inescapably than any other. Travel 1,000 miles by train and you are a brute. Pedal 500 miles on a bicycle and you remain basically bourgeois. But paddle 100 in a canoe and you are already a child of nature. I couldn't agree more.